So let's ask a big question. We are a year and 4 months, 5 months, something like that, into this war. Who is winning?
Well, I think that it's hard to exactly tell, but I would say Ukraine. And this is why. Number one, I think that Russia's offensive potential has been now almost terminally degraded. And we noticed that really from the context of the most recent winter into early spring offensive. The only thing that they were able to do was take over Soledar and Bakhmut, and they were able to do so with such heavy casualties, right? We're looking at perhaps on all the front lines, not including Bakhmut, where the majority of these people are, 100,000 Russian soldiers being killed or potentially injured to the point at which they can't return to the battlefield.
This winter you're talking about?
Yeah, just in the 5 months from December to May. That was the U.S. estimates that were coming forward. Ukrainian estimates would be even higher than that. We're looking at a staggering loss of life, particularly amongst conscripts and amongst the convicts who were recruited by the Wagner Group in terms of paramilitary functions. And also Russia's inability to really launch further offensive operations beyond where they've gotten. They can't even seem to make headway in larger cities like Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, let alone advance along multiple axes like they hoped for, which was Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, and then potentially on towards Kiev. So the Russians have lost their offensive capabilities. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, have suffered heavy losses in Bakhmut, including among some of their most elite territorial defense forces, but they've also siphoned off enough high-level forces, gotten them trained in Western countries, in Germany, in Poland, in Britain, to be able to launch a counteroffensive, and now they have more equipment than they could ever have dreamed of to be able to achieve that. Also, Ukraine now has the ability to strike infrastructure in the Russian-occupied territories, logistics hubs, as well as airfields in Crimea, and even surreptitiously strike and cause chaos inside Russia's borders. So that's why I think that Ukraine is in a much more advantageous position than Russia is right now.
When you say Russia, Sam, it's quite confusing when you're over here because you have the Wagner Group, you have Prigozhin, who appears to be the person occupying Bakhmut. I mean, that's the major force there, right? So, and yet he is, while occupying Bakhmut, while fighting really hard for it, is then openly bad-mouthing the Kremlin and the Russian war machine. This is not something that one usually sees in wartime. So tell us, explain a little bit more. We know the Wagner Group is operating sort of alongside the Russian military, but to what extent is it actually independent of Putin's direction?
So the Wagner Group is basically a paramilitary force that's aligned most closely with the Russian intelligence services, especially the Russian main intelligence directorate, the GRU. And Yevgeny Prigozhin has served in a variety of functions for it, sometimes as financier and sometimes as a middleman who negotiates contracts with foreign actors on the behalf of the Russian military. Increasingly, however, Prigozhin has gained a lot more autonomy as this war has progressed. So while originally the Wagner Group was confined in the early operations in Kiev as something of a shock force, basically, that was engaged in sabotage operations, but with directives from the Kremlin on how to assassinate Zelensky, a complement to existing Russian military forces or Chechen paramilitaries. Now they become something of a freestanding military organization. They've got independent financing routes, which come from mineral reserves, especially gold and diamond reserves in countries like Central African Republic and Sudan. They have independent recruitment, which came through from Prigozhin's active recruitment efforts everywhere from fitness centers to prisons, though the Ministry of Defense is now reining in some of the prison movements. And they also have an unprecedented degree of autonomy over strategy, where they don't have to respond to the power vertical and they can make decisions on the spot. And Prigozhin, because of his personal relationship with Putin, has been given free expression, basically, to criticize and to attack Shoigu, Gerasimov, and other perceived enemies, like the St. Petersburg governor. And I think that he's being allowed to do that because Putin doesn't want any single apparatus within the security services to become too powerful and likes this kind of bickering because it makes him look like a statesman.
I see. So in some ways, allowing these bickering parties to continue openly allows him to be the kind of decider of these squabbles.